Tūtahi I te wharikarakia hātou mateo tapu e tunei tēnā koe. Tuarua e te tumuaki o tēnei whare Helen tēnā koe. Te whaia waiora, tēnā koe mō tō mihi, mō tō aroha, mō tō wairoa, mō tō rangatiratanga, mō tō awhina, mō tō ātawhai ke mata. E te whānau ko tai mai nei o tēnei ata, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. I stand here this morning, despite that little introduction, with a still heart, a heart that is stilled with gratitude. I come before you deeply grateful for the invitation, for you as a community, and for who you are. As you may know, the Auckland City Mission last year celebrated our centennial, 100 years. And normally an organisation like ours, like yours, who has touched the lives of hundreds of thousands of people in the course of 100 years, which has led to life-changing and lives being changed, who has thousands and thousands of supporters, donors, staff, volunteers, you'd expect we would have a big bash to celebrate 100 years. And in case you're thinking, gosh, they had a big bash, but we weren't invited, well, we didn't. The big bash will be in October or November this year when we open home ground. And believe you me, you will be invited. In actual fact, on our centennial weekend, the 6th and 7th of June last year, there were two events, simple, poignant, incredibly meaningful, that spoke of the heart of the mission. One was on dawn, and this was in the middle of winter, in the dark, on the 6th of June, our centennial day, in the presence and with the blessing of two bishops, Kito and Bishop Jim White, a small group of us planted deep in the earth under the building, the Maori stone, the stone that was gifted to us by Ngāti Whātua, which connects that building to the earth, which encompasses the essence of what we do and why we do it and what we aspire towards. So deep in the ground, we planted on the 6th of June, 100 years after the mission was founded, the Maori stone. And then the very next day, we had a service of thanksgiving in this church. Unfortunately, COVID restrictions prevented many from attending. However, we did it, and in that ceremony, we connected with the wider community through that service. Today I want to come back to this place and acknowledge this community and this church for who you are to the Auckland City Mission. You're not just our neighbour, we're tied and united together, both in term, well, not only both, but in many ways through our history, our shared values, our relationships, our working together and what we aspire towards. I was recently listening to an interview a few years ago between Jessie Mulligan and Helen, your vicar. And Helen spoke of one of the values of this church, and she's phrased it like this: we at St. Matthew's speak out for those who have less. We challenge those who have more. And I thought that encompassed so well one of those core values where we connect. I stand here today, if I do nothing else, but to thank you as a community. I mihi to you in the best and the most deepest possible way I mihi to all those who have passed on, including our founder, who was a curate here, Reverend Jasper Calder. Last year we published a book which really speaks strongly of the relationship we have. It's called Agency of Hope. And without kind of putting on my salesman hat, if you haven't got it, it's really worth getting, and it can be got through the office. It's called Agency of Hope. And on the front cover, there's a picture of our old mission building in Grays Avenue with the light shining at night through the windows with an open door, and there's a family coming through the open door. We call the mission a beacon of light and a beacon of hope. But any beacon has to be lit, first of all. It doesn't light itself. And any beacon has to be fueled. It doesn't fuel itself. The beacon of the mission was lit in this very church, and over the years you've been part of the fueling and the refueling time and time again. I want to mihi to you for your courage. In this community, in our city, time and time again, you have shown courage to stand for justice and against injustice, and to stand with those who experience injustice in our community. I mihi to you for that courage. I acknowledge your leader here, Helen Jacoby, and her leadership of this community over the last 6 years, and the way that Helen connects us to this community. I acknowledge Kate Thorne. Kate has this title of Priest for Community Engagement. Well, in actual fact, that just means connecting with. And in the old days, Kate would have been the chaplain. We would have called her the chaplain of the mission. But Kate just connects with us. Almost like that prayer, Kate walks lightly amongst us, being a presence, a quiet, humble presence within the mission, and bringing that spirit. I mihi to the team here, the administrative team who quietly sit behind the scenes, Ian and Dimitri and Pip. I mihi to the beautiful music team that touch our souls deeply through what they gift us with. And in a particular way today, I want to acknowledge two people who are part of your community. One is Wilf Holt, your deacon. And Wilf captures in his very spirit what a deacon is. He's a servant. He is a servant. In fact, he was supposed to be here this morning, and at the last minute isn't, because he's up at the mission, filling in for somebody who didn't turn up. On Thursday last, Wilf showed the very spirit of what a servant deacon is. In the early morning, two of our outreach team came across one of our streeties, who we know well, who had passed away in the night and was lying alone on the street, on the footpath, outside a shop up in Mount Roskill. They were the first to come upon him, and they knew him. So what did they do? They called the mission, and immediately Wilf and one of our other workers, a Tokalauan nun, went out there and prayed over and with him. And some more mission staff came, and Wilf ensured that that person who had passed was handled and cared for with utter dignity as he was moved into a hearse and away. To me, that captured so much of what the deacon is. And the other person I want to acknowledge this morning is Linda Murphy, who sits up there. Linda is a priest here, but is a social worker at the mission. And sometimes it's said that a priest is most of all a priest, with their robes off, working outside the church. That's when you see the real essence of a priest. And Linda works quietly as a social worker in the mission. Like Wilf, she's a bit of a kumra. She doesn't speak of her own sweetness. There's recently been a series, you can go get it on YouTube, called K-Road Chronicles. K-Road Chronicles. And there's one whole section devoted to Linda and her work with one of our streeties, who says and looks in the camera, "I would not be alive today if it wasn't for Linda." I acknowledge the other clergy who are part of this church, and I see Suzanne there and others who have inspired and gifted us. The many, many volunteers who work with us. I would have to name Judith today, who now has become such a regular in our kitchen and serving the food at the mission. Reaching out to those who do not have is in the DNA of this community. It's part of who you are and have been. In 1912, you established your own mission called the Dock Street Mission, modelled on the Wellington City Mission, which had come out of St. Peter's Church in Wellington. You established the mission to work among the very poor in Freeman's Bay in 1912. In 1914, a wild, irreverent, loudmouth curate came here by the name of Jasper Calder. And he took that spirit and expanded it. Jasper tried to get into the army in 1914 and work and accompany troops in World War I, but his health made that impossible. So he devoted himself in the next 4 years to work in this area, particularly in the Freeman's Bay area, with those who are very poor. In 1918, when the Spanish flu hit, Jasper volunteered and worked as a hearse driver. Now, a hearse driver in 1918, in the midst of the Spanish flu, which killed 3,000 people in Auckland in 3 months. 3,000, now we know what this means now in the COVID world, in 3 months died. So the hearse driver was essentially the person who had the cart and horse and who put the bodies on the back of the cart. And that's what Jasper did. Little wonder that he caught the Spanish flu, and his whole family caught the Spanish flu. Miraculously, they all survived. In 1919, the vicar here resigned, and the church community petitioned the bishop that Jasper become the vicar. Didn't have much chance because the bishop had been the prime target of Jasper's criticism of the church for not getting out among the people. So no surprise that another person was appointed, and the whole community here protested. So much so they did the most unthinkable thing a church community could do at that time. The choir went on strike for 2 weeks. It was so serious it became the headline in the Auckland Star. St. Matthew's Church Choir strikes. So that was the era. In 1919, however, the City Mission was conceived in this very building. Jasper and a group of others knew they had to go further and establish the Auckland City Mission. Jasper was quickly sent away to Holy Sepulchre Church in Kaiba Pass, out of sight, out of mind, until the bishop went to the Lambeth Conference in London, and at that point the diocese appointed Jasper as the first city missioner with the task of establishing the mission, which he did in 1920. And the rest is history. And it's great history. Read about it in the book, Agency of Hope. 100 years later, another former curate stood in this very place at that pulpit last year on our 100th anniversary, the 7th of June, Bishop Jim White, and he gave what turned out to be his final sermon before he passed away. So poignant. And in that sermon, Bishop Jim pulled together all the threads of who we are into one beautiful whāriki and presented it. And when history is written, it will be one of the most incredible sermons ever preached in this church. And it needs to be recorded. In that sermon, Jim said this: "Love makes possible the true gift. a love with no return. It is a love that reaches across and beyond any reasonable limits we might have. A love that goes where no relationship exists. No relationship except the most basic of compassion for another fellow human being. These words of Bishop Jim echo the words of another man who spoke here 25 years previously, a black man who had been imprisoned for 27 years in South Africa. Nelson Mandela came to this church and to this very spot and spoke to this community and thanked this community. And he said, "You chose to speak out and act. Put the well-being of others ahead of your own." Mandela also said, "Our human compassion," and there's that word again, "binds us to one another, not in pity or patronizingly, but as human beings who have learned how to turn our common suffering into hope for the future." These two incredibly great men who have been in our midst and who spoke where I speak now echoed the words of Jesus. The words you hear here, Sunday upon Sunday, which are absolutely then unwrapped for you so carefully and sensitively by those who preach here. And the sermons go deeper and deeper and help us understand those words and relate them to our current context. Today's gospel once again gives us some words and some actions of Jesus which we no doubt reflect on. And when I read those words, when I hear them, there are 4 words that just hit me straight away. One is leper, the second is pity, the third is touch, and the fourth is healing. You know that lepers at that time were the most excluded of people in the community. They were untouchables. They were treated as less than human. They were excluded and not part of. The question for us today is, who are the lepers in our community today? Who do we treat lesser than myself? Who do we exclude? Who does the community exclude? Who have less rights than you and me, and yet live amongst us as fellow human beings? It's a question that must go deep within us, and we all have to answer it. The second word, pity, it really troubles me. And I think I was handed a curved ball with this one, because I looked at 4 other translations of this particular text, and every single one of them has 4 different interpretations for that word. Jesus looked upon the leper with pity. Jesus looked upon the leper with sorrow. Jesus looked upon the leper filled with compassion. Jesus looked upon the leper and became angry. These are tricky ones, and I'm going to let some experts in the future, like Helen and Kate, unravel them for us. Pity, sorrow, compassion, anger. Which one do we choose? Well, perhaps a bit of them all, really. Pity is an English word. It really came into being in the 14th century based on a Latin word. It doesn't sit well with us. There's benevolent pity, kind pity, but there's also a kind of a contemptuous pity, isn't there? That connotes feelings of being superior, condescension, being condescending, patronizing, and even contemptuous. The Hebrew word hesed perhaps is more like it, which talks of loving kindness and compassion. However, Aristotle, who used that Greek word that was later translated as pity, says this: Before a person can feel pity for another, the person must have first experienced suffering of a similar type. And it is only from that experience of suffering can then one connect with the other. So that's probably more like our understanding of compassion, isn't it? But let's not push away completely the anger translation. For there is no doubt that Jesus, time and time again, when he saw injustice and wrong, he became angry. There were feelings of anger welling up in him. And this too becomes controversial in our context. Is it right to be angry? Well, it depends what we do with our anger, isn't it? If we let it run wild and take over, it's wrong. If we channel that energy into making change and being part of the change, as Gandhi said, it's right. Feelings of anger or outrage can lead to a compassion that forcefully changes and challenges an unjust system and can take on a confrontational form, as occurred with Gandhi, Martin Luther King, the Dalai Lama, and Jesus. Healing. Are we being called to heal? How do we heal those who are lepers in our midst today? The answer is very simple. We do what Jesus did. We touch them. Either literally, figuratively, metaphorically, we touch them. We connect with people who are treated as outcasts, who are separated from us. And simply that means entering into a relationship with them. It's not complex. Rather than throw a coin anonymously in a box, smile and say hello. Get on your knees and have a word or two. Become to know the other. And it is in that treating of the other with that dignity that healing begins. The prime and most important value of our mission, the Auckland City Mission, is manaakitanga. And the way we translate that is not just about being generous and welcoming, but it is acknowledging that the mana of the other, is equal to or greater than my own. Now, once you get that, and once you bring that into a relationship, healing begins. I spoke to you about the man who passed away on the street in our city last Thursday and our connecting with him. Because Wilf and our team were there, they got to hear a wider story, a story that's not normally heard because nobody bothers to listen or to ask. That man slept outside a shop that gave him some things from time to time. But the real magic is, during that time he was on the street, every day a little girl and her mother would come along and he would teach that little girl Samoan, because he was Samoan and she was Samoan. And every day last week, on her way to school, she would give half of her school lunch to Anthony and then go to school. In many ways, that was such a healing touch, and it's right in our community. People who stand here every week and speak to you often leave you with an exhortation. Go out and do this, change, repent, give, follow, be, do something. I cannot and will not do that today. For as I stand here and perhaps for the last time have this opportunity, I simply want to acknowledge you and say thank you. Time and time again, I know you have reached out, you have touched, you've struggled with, you've cared for those who are marginalised and excluded in our community. This is at the heart of St. Matthew's in the city. This is what this church stands for. We are proud to be your neighbour and proud to be connected to you, as you are proud to be connected to us. And we look forward to returning to this space in a few months' time. And so I leave you with my prayer. May the Spirit that has led you to respond to respect, and to relate with those most excluded in our community continue to lead you, and may you continue to respond. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou. Ngā manakitanga, kia ora mai anō tātou.